I welcome representatives from the University of Melbourne and the University of New South Wales via video conference. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to the parliamentary committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee today? And we'll start with those in the room.
I'm Professor Nicola Phillips. I'm the Provost and the Interim Vice-Chancellor of the University of Melbourne.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
And online, the UNSW.
I'm Professor Verity Firth. I'm the Vice President of Societal Impact, Equity and Engagement at UNSW.
I'm David Cross. I'm the Chief of Staff at UNSW.
Thank you. All right. I'll now invite you to make an opening statement. At the conclusion of that, we'll open up for a discussion and we'll start with the University of Melbourne.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Allow me to say again what I said to the Senate Committee inquiry in September. The University of Melbourne stands against all forms of racism, and we are steadfast in our commitment to combat anti-Semitism on our campuses. We recognise that Jewish members of our community can experience particular forms of prejudice or hate. We, like others, have observed the increase in anti-Semitic behaviours across society, most recently in the devastating attack on the Adass Israel synagogue in our own city and the deeply disturbing events of the last couple of days in Sydney. While there are very different views within our university and outside it in relation to what has occurred on our campuses over the course of this year, we move into 2025 with undimmed resolve to tackle anti-Semitism in all of its forms and to make sure our campuses are safe and welcoming places for everyone, including all Jewish staff, students and visitors. Excuse me. We have learned much over the last 14 months, and we have been proactively seeking to deal with the issue of tension on our campus. There has been some activity that has been unacceptable on our campuses, as in society at large. On such occasions, we have been clear in our condemnation of the conduct and have taken action. We have welcomed the appointment of the Special Envoy for Anti-Semitism, Gillian Segal, AO, and have been working actively with her to support her work together with the Group of 8 and Universities Australia. We have convened an expert roundtable for the Special Envoy for Social Cohesion, Peter Halil MP, and we have also met with the recently appointed Special Envoy to Combat Islamophobia in Australia, Mr. Avtab Malik. We have been systematic in the application of our policies and procedures to guide our approach and decision-making, especially in relation to managing conflict. This has been supported by careful legal advice, ongoing advice from Victoria Police, and dialogue with our staff and students. We have taken and will continue to take disciplinary action where this is warranted, and have been clear that we must do all that is required to protect and uphold the integrity and the fairness of those processes. Over the course of the year, we have continually assessed our policies and regulations and taken steps to tighten up, clarify or improve them where we have identified the need to do so, as well as communicating our expectations clearly in relation to protest and activism on campus. In advance of the commencement of this academic year, we revisited key guidance, including our Educator's Guide, and we have been working throughout the year to develop our undergraduate discovery subjects to support respectful management of difference. In 2025, we will conduct a comprehensive review of our policies and procedures. Building on ongoing improvement over the past year, this review will draw on the work of the envoys, expert advice, and other significant external reviews. This will take into consideration the work that we have done this year on our academic values, on which we will build further in 2025. As I said in my statement to the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee hearing, there is no doubt that at times we have been challenged in balancing our legal and ethical responsibilities to protect freedom of speech, the right to peaceful protest, and the values of academic freedom, with the duty of care that we have to all students and staff to provide a safe and welcoming environment for them. We will continue learning, but our resolve is firm. The University of Melbourne will leave no stone unturned in our efforts to eradicate anti-Semitism and all forms of racism from our campuses.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
UNSW.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting UNSW to participate in this hearing. Along with my colleague David Cross, I thank the committee for inviting us to share UNSW's experiences. And I apologise, our Vice-Chancellor attended the recent Senate committee hearing, but is unfortunately unable to attend this hearing in person as he is on leave this week at a location with no internet access. and that, of course, was booked several months ago, so I will be appearing on behalf of UNSW. We have been deeply concerned at the alarming increase in anti-Semitism across the country following the terrorist attacks in Israel on October the 7th, 2023, and the violence and loss of life in the Middle East. It's also troubling and deeply disturbing to hear of last week's attack on the AUS Israel synagogue in Melbourne and the recent events in our own city, including vandalism of cars and buildings in Willara and protests outside Sydney's Great Synagogue. As a globally connected community, we must be mindful that many of those we work, study and live with have been personally impacted by the conflict in the Middle East. We know that in the weeks following the October 7th attack, the experience of anti-Semitism in Australia has risen significantly, with a Monash University survey showing that 64% of Australian Jews feel anti-Semitism was very much a big problem in Australia, which is 10 times higher than when a similar question was asked in 2017. I imagine that's even higher following the recent events. The priority of all of us in leadership positions at UNSW is to ensure that the university is always a safe place for students and staff to learn, teach, research and work. We welcome the government's appointment of a special envoy into anti-Semitism, and we look forward to continuing to work with her and her office to combat prejudice across this country. Recognising the rising scourge of anti-Semitism over the past year across Australia, we've undertaken a range of measures to ensure that our community, including Jewish students and staff, feel safe, welcome and supported on campus. This includes, but is certainly not limited to, university-wide consultation to upgrade and extend our anti-racism policy to include anti-religious vilification, as well as updating our code of conduct to provide better protections against those experiencing vilification. We've increased actual safety through increasing physical security, including additional guards, additional patrols, increased security visibility, monitoring and removing of any posted material which breaches our code of conduct, and increased connectivity with external law enforcement agencies. We're increasing a culture of safety through measures such as improved risk assessment of all UNSW events and revising UNSW student onboarding training and orientation with a specific focus on the UNSW Code of Conduct to let students know what they can expect of the university as well as what the university expects of them. This includes a deeper focus on inclusion in respectful behaviours and case studies, and links to anti-racism and anti-religious vilification policies. Ensuring senior staff meet regularly, both proactively and reactively, with relevant groups such as staff, students, alumni and others, to listen and respond to issues and concerns around anti-Semitism. And balancing the rights to free speech with students and staff well-being by changing the way posters can be displayed at the university, as I mentioned previously. We've created a dramatic increase and promotion of pathways to make complaints or raise concerns, as well as significantly increasing the resources of staff who deal with such complaints. The Vice-Chancellor has made regular communications, supplemented by similar communication from other leaders across UNSW. And we've also increased direct support for students and staff through a significant expansion of confidential counselling services and other similar programs. There is no place in Australia and in our education institutions for racism, hate speech or discrimination of any type, even when strong views are being expressed. Freedom of speech and the ability to respectfully debate ideas, including contentious ones, are crucial to the health of any democracy. That includes supporting the right of all people to speak up, to protest and to follow their convictions, even when their views may be upsetting to other members of our community. However, something as important as the right to protest should never be used as a veil to hide expressions of anti-Semitism or other hatred. We must treat each other with respect and kindness, care and sensitivity to other points of view to ensure that we remain an inclusive society that we're all proud to be part of. I believe UNSW generally has a positive and inclusive culture. However, we are not complacent and we know that there is more we must do to make people feel safe and included at our campus.
Thank you, Professor. I'm going to start with questions and then I'll hand over to my colleagues. I'm going to start with Professor Phillips. And thank you both for your time today. Thank you all for your time today. On the 22nd of March, the university sent an email out to all students reminding them of the university's policies that students should not be causing unreasonable disruption or forced cancellation of classes or events, infringing the rights of others to participate in activities, blocking access to buildings or activities, taking photographs, video or audio recordings of classes and so on. So just confirming that is something that the university did?
Yes.
And how do you enforce those sorts of policies?
We enforce those sorts of policies through careful process. We aim to make sure that we understand what is going on across our university and take careful decisions about when action is warranted. That action, of course, can take many different forms. Sometimes that would be formal disciplinary action. Sometimes it would be more informal, depending on the circumstances at hand. We have a very solid complaints and grievances process through which we can accept formal complaints. And of course, we look to people right across the university, in our classrooms, in our faculties, in all of our central units, to be clear in our responsibilities in relation to providing a safe and welcoming environment and to be dealing with any violations of our policies that occur.
Thank you for that. So, do you report publicly when incidents are occurred via your complaints process? Do you have any transparency measures on that?
No, we don't, because complaints that we receive are, of course, confidential, and we have to conduct the processes in respecting the obligations that we have in relation to privacy and confidentiality.
But do you communicate back with someone who's made the complaint about it?
Oh, indeed so. Absolutely, yes.
Isn't there a way that you could publicly be reporting on your complaints outcomes without infringing someone's privacy? We've had X amount of complaints, these have been the outcomes, that sort of transparency measure?
Yes, indeed, and that's what we're intending to put in place. You may be aware that we have adopted that practice in relation to sexual misconduct. It's an example that's frequently given, with great success, in fact. And what we've learned most of all through that process is that that level of transparency, which can be achieved in a way that's compatible with privacy and confidentiality, helps to build trust in the system. That is what we are aiming to achieve here with all complaints about racism, and specifically in this case in relation to complaints about anti-Semitism. So we will be moving in that direction.
When?
Well, as I said, we're conducting a full review of our policies and procedures in 2025. As part, though, of our anti-racism action plan, which was released in the middle of this year, we committed to that level of transparency. We intend to do it on an annual basis in the same way as sexual misconduct, but we will be looking at the details of exactly how we do that. We are looking at them at the moment, and we'll be confirming those in the new year.
So you'll report in the new year on that?
Yes, indeed, yes.
So in 2025 we can expect a transparency report on the outcomes of your...
Yes, we're working through the details at the moment of how best to go about that, but we have the model that we have used with other policies, as I said, with success.
And roughly when can we expect that?
I'm afraid I can't give you a date, but I can certainly keep the committee
first half of next year, second half of next year?
Or certainly early in next year,
okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So thank you for that. So on the 19th of April, an email was sent out from the University Arts Faculty, Dean Leslie Sterling, saying that I'm writing to you as a matter of urgency to make you aware that we are receiving an increasing number of concerns and reports from students about events occurring in the classrooms and other student-facing contexts pertaining to the Israel-Gaza conflict. Students in arts have been particularly concerned about activists visiting classrooms, asking for a show of hands to indicate agreement with their statements and then taking photographs of the group. Are you aware of these incidents?
Yes, indeed.
Do you want to just give the committee, for the benefit of Hansard, a rough overview of what happened?
Yes, we became aware of these kinds of incidents where people were using the classroom setting in order to distribute material and promote particular kinds of views, and then asking for people to indicate their responses to this. As you will know from Professor Sterling's email, we found this activity to be completely unacceptable. I can indicate to you that in semester 1 we received 4 complaints about 4 incursions into a classroom setting. To put that in context, that's out of a total of 15,146 teaching activities. So this was not widespread, but any incidence of that kind of activity was deemed to be unacceptable, and the Dean acted swiftly to communicate about it.
So the Dean acted swiftly to communicate about it. Clearly, going back to your policy of you can't unreasonably disrupt or force cancellation of classes, you can't infringe of the right of others to participate, but then also taking photographs, video, audio recordings, and it's clearly a breach of the university's policies. Were any students, any action taken against anyone?
We took steps to communicate again to our students with clarity the expectations that
understand that communication
that we have of them, so that they could be in no doubt about the view that we took of this kind of behaviour. As always,
Professor, I'm very sorry for interrupting, but I think there is a clear difference between saying to students, "We don't think this is appropriate." You sent out an email as a university saying, here are our policies that you need to adhere to. They weren't adhered to. What does the university do? I mean, it just sort of says, according to what you just said, well, we don't want you doing this, but what action was taken?
Yeah. In these particular instances, of course, we have to work according to a burden of proof that these things have happened. We don't have CCTV in our classrooms. We don't have clear mechanisms for identifying people. It's a significantly complicated exercise. In other settings, of course, we can use other kinds of technologies, but in this setting, it was very difficult for us to gather the evidence that would be needed to take formal disciplinary action. We therefore decided that our priority had to be that clear communication, making sure that our colleagues were absolutely clear about what they were and were not to allow in the classroom setting, and sought to pursue it in that way, given the limitations of the formal action that we could take. As I said, we have received 4 complaints about classroom incursions. This is not a widespread practice, and that communication, I think, was robust in dealing with the problem.
Well, let's see if it was, because let's keep going onwards. And obviously, there was a student sent from the Vice-Chancellor Maskell at the time around, obviously the encampments happened, and students overtook buildings as well as part of that. Do you want to, just for the benefit of Hansard, go through what happened there?
Yes, we had an encampment on the campus, as you say. That then translated into the occupation of a building. It was our Arts West building by a group of students, which lasted for 10 days. We brought that building occupation to an end peacefully after that period of time.
After 10 days?
It took 10 days, that's right.
I mean, that's a significant disruption to classes, though, isn't it? I mean, you would say that for those 10 days, no classes could occur in those buildings?
That's right. We rescheduled all the classes. Nobody lost out on any teaching. We were clear right from the start of the building occupation that this had crossed the line, that this kind of protest was unacceptable. That was made very clear to the people who were occupying the building at the time. But the principles that we brought to bear on our management of that, as with the encampment, was that we needed to do everything in our power to secure a peaceful resolution of that, to avoid violence on our campuses, either violence that were caused by the occupation itself or other people who were coming onto our campuses, or violence that was inflicted at our behest in order to resolve this. We were able to do that, and it did take a little bit of time to work through that, but we did achieve that, and I stand by the adoption of that principle in managing that conflict.
Sure. Again, I'll ask the same question, though. The university clearly outlines its policy.
Yes.
You can't go into buildings and disrupt classes. For 10 days, students overtake a building. Were any disciplinary actions taken against any students?
Yes, indeed, they were. Disciplinary action was taken against 23 students and 4 members of staff, specifically in relation to that building occupation.
You had staff in there as well?
That's right.
And what happened to those staff?
Well, disciplinary proceedings were initiated immediately after the occupation. I can't comment on the specifics of these cases for reasons of confidentiality. But
did any of the staff lose their job?
I'm sorry?
Did any of the staff lose their job?
No. The outcomes,
so they're all still working at the
outcomes
university?
For both. The outcomes, again, I can't comment on individual cases, and they were dealt with as individual cases.
I'm not asking you to comment on individual cases, just broadly. I'm not asking for names. Were any of the staff who were in the buildings for, a part of those 10 days disruptions, have any of them lost their job?
No.
Have any of the students been kicked off campus or unable to continue their studies?
No.
Is that reasonable?
We think it is reasonable. Again, we conducted very careful process that we were careful to do fairly and in accordance with our legal obligations as well. The outcomes that were imposed are, again, I'm not going to comment on the specifics, but the outcomes that were...
Let's be clear, I'm not asking about specific people. I'm asking about the fact that you had, 23 people, of which 4 of them were staff, taking over a building, or 23 students?
That's right.
And then, so 27, disciplinary action. None from 27. No one was asked to no longer participate in university activity.
No, that is...
So it is allowed. You did allow it.
No. The outcomes from those processes were significant. For the students, they were issued with formal warnings. And that is a significant outcome for students. It was considered to be proportionate through our processes to the nature of the misconduct. But it does impose serious consequences. This is not a light outcome. Now, there will be differences of view. Many people think that those outcomes were not severe enough. Many people think that it was outrageous that we took any action in the first place. We were determined that we needed to respond to the occupation of the building, and I'm confident that we did so appropriately.
I'm only asking about your own policy and the upholding of your own policy. Let's go on to another incident. On the 17th of September, there's a group called the UNI MEL for Palestine, which is an Instagram page, and they put up the phone number of the academic lead of a joint PhD program, Professor Stephen Prower. Do you want to describe for Hansard Professor Prower's role and the sorts of academic work he's involved in?
Yes, indeed. Professor Prower is a highly valued colleague. He's a professor of physics, and he oversees the relationship that we have with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem.
In any of Professor Prower's work, is anything related to defence or military at all?
No, he oversees the relationship that we have with the Hebrew University.
Yeah. And all of the PhD students are all in sort of science and other sorts of disciplines.
That's right.
Yeah, but nothing to do with defence.
No.
So he has his phone number posted online by a university group. Was the university aware of that at the time?
Yes, we were.
And did anything happen as a result of the phone number being posted online of one of your lecturers?
Yes, indeed it did. We were in communication constantly with Professor Prower at that time. We made additional security arrangements to make sure that he was confident of our commitment to his security. And we were taking steps to monitor all of that activity and to see whether it was possible to identify where that was coming from. And
so in your monitoring, then 3 weeks later, what happened?
3 weeks after
his phone number was put online, what happened to him in his office?
On the 9th of October, I assume that you're referring to the incursion into his office, which took place on the 9th of October. I'm sorry if I misspoke. No, I don't know if I said November. The 9th of October. Yeah. A group of people managed to gain entry to his office. It was a set of unfortunate circumstances that related to the work that was being carried out in order to install additional security around his office because of the way that he had been targeted online. They spent a period of time in his office until such time as the police arrived. The police arrived within 25 minutes of our security staff calling them, and then the protesters left his office.
Were these protesters students of the university?
We have been taking steps to identify where it has been possible to do so, who was involved in that. Our investigation is ongoing, so I can't comment on that at the moment.
So you don't know who was in his office?
I can't comment on exactly who was in his office. The investigation is ongoing at the moment in conjunction with Victoria Police.
I'm not asking you to release names. Do you know who was in your professor's office?
We have been able to identify some people, not all.
Are they students or in any relation or contact with the university?
Again, I must insist that I can't, as a result of privacy obligations, comment on that while the investigation is ongoing. I don't
understand why can't you identify whether someone is associated with the university after they take over one of your professor's offices?
We have a very clear policy on not commenting on investigations that are active at the moment, particularly where there is the involvement of Victoria Police. I might remind you that we're operating in a very complicated environment here. The steps that we have taken previously to identify who has been involved in protest have led to the launch of an investigation by the Office of the Victorian Information Commissioner against the university, and we are determined and constrained to make sure that all of our process conforms with laws on privacy and confidentiality. What we do know, we think, is that some external parties were involved in that incursion into Professor Prower's office.
Some, but not the entire group.
Again, I can't go into detail, but no, we assume...
We don't need to labour the point. Yeah. I guess then let's ask the question. If someone was to be a student of the university, what disciplinary action would they
We have immediately initiated disciplinary action according to our policies. The range of penalties that are available to us are set out. We will pursue our process. We will do it properly. And we will do that not only for ethical reasons and for legal reasons, but because, of course, we want any outcomes from these disciplinary processes to be not to be vulnerable to challenge on the basis of procedural irregularity. So we will conduct the process carefully. But I can state here, as the Vice-Chancellor stated in his communications, and we have said consistently, that we consider this incursion into Professor Prower's office to be an outrage. It is way beyond the bounds of what is acceptable conduct on our campuses, and we immediately initiated our action and have been cooperating with Victoria Police in their investigation of the circumstances as well. So
let's just take a step back, Professor, because I've just outlined 3 incidents and there's been no doubt more. But you had a situation where earlier in the year the university sets out the policies of what code of conduct needs to happen on campus, which I think is an important thing to do. Students come into a university, they take photographs of students, they try and identify students that agree or disagree with a particular statement on the Middle East. As far as I'm aware, no disciplinary action is taken against any students. You then have a situation where not only students are, there's the encampment, but actually students take over a building, 23 students and 4 staff take over a building. Everyone's still at the university. No one loses their job, no one loses their ability to study at the university. You now have a situation where a university professor's personal phone number was put online in a clear incidence of doxing. His office is then taken over, and now we're told, well, because of privacy reasons, nothing, we can't identify whether or not they've even got associations with the university. I'm just trying to say, well, when you look at that year, right, when you look at one incident after another, everyone's still at the university, everyone's still participating fully. And they may have had a formal warning, but it really doesn't have any impact on their future studies. It seems like the university is saying a lot but doing very little. Is there any proof to the contrary?
I reject that view, and with respect, Chair, I haven't said that we are unable to take any action in relation to the last incident that you covered. I've said that I can't comment publicly on it. Right. We have initiated disciplinary proceedings, and we will pursue those to their outcome.
So you have initiated disciplinary proceedings because they are affiliated with the university?
We have initiated disciplinary proceedings and we are working with Victoria Police. I think the additional context that I must give here is that the university is not a law enforcement agency and we are not the police. We don't have the same kinds of sophisticated technologies available to us for identifying people who may be involved in these kinds of protests. And similarly, we don't have the capacity to undertake, in the way that the police would be able to, investigations into social media activity and so on. We are constrained to work with the police, as we are doing on all of this. However, when you, if I could just address your general comment again, I must object to the characterisation of our university as talking a lot and doing nothing. I've outlined the action that we've taken, where it has been possible to take action. I stand by the outcomes of that action as being proportionate in those particular circumstances, and we will remain committed to making sure that we take action wherever the need arises to do so.
Professor, I really appreciate it. I'm just going to pick up on one thing you just said, that the university has initiated disciplinary action on what happened in Professor Prower's office. So clearly you are aware of if those people in Professor Prower's office have any affiliation, whether they be a student or staff to the university. I mean, how else could you initiate disciplinary proceedings? I don't understand otherwise.
Yes, indeed. We have started our own disciplinary proceedings.
So there were university staff or students in Professor Prower's office?
Again, I am unable to comment publicly on the specifics of an investigation that is ongoing, and it's really important that I don't prejudice.
You said that there was disciplinary action going on.
It is really important that I don't prejudice the potential outcomes of these disciplinary processes. I ask you to understand that.
I do. The point of this hearing is not actually to have the universities come into here and try and defend what is or isn't going on in university. The point is to actually try and get outcomes so that these sorts of things don't happen on universities, and that universities are able to work together with authorities, as you say, to prevent these sorts of incidents happening on university. And I think it's just important to know, well, you've sent out your university policies, you've asked students to comply with it, you've had incidents of students going into classes, taking photographs, taking over buildings, taking over a Jewish professor's office, and I'm just trying to get a straight answer about, well, if you've got university staff or you've got university students, are they going to be allowed to continue at the university if they do things like that? I mean, surely a bit of leadership from the university to say, if you break our code of conduct, you will not be able to continue at the university. I mean, I don't understand why the university isn't upholding their own procedures.
Yeah. Again, I must state in response to that we are upholding our policies and procedures. I indicated in my opening statement that we've done a lot of work on those policies and procedures where we have identified the need to do so over the course of this year, which will allow us emphatically to deal with these kinds of incidents. I would just mention to you as well that we've seen a dramatic reduction in the number of incidents that are taking place on our campus over the course of the year. And again, it is not possible to be categorical about this, but we would assume that this is at least in part a result of the work that we've been doing very clearly to communicate with students about the potential consequences. 147 incidents between January and September this year, and then 12 incidents since October. The majority of those have been about posters and stickers and graffiti. Yeah. So we are seeing a reduction in the number of incidents on campus, which is, of course, our aim, particularly in the interest, of course, of the extent to which Jewish staff and students can feel welcome and safe on our campus.
I appreciate that, Professor, and I appreciate all your efforts in this, and I'll hand over to the Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Professor Phillips, just on those stats, I'll run through another line of questioning, but just on those statistics, you're basing that based on the number of complaints that the university has received? No,
that's the number of campus incidents that are reported to us by our security staff and campus management. So the number of incidents that would include posters, stickers, graffiti, any kind of protest on campus and so on.
So that's based on staff reporting these as opposed to students?
That's right. We have campus management teams who report to us what is going on across the campus, and these are recorded as campus incidents.
Okay. And what has the university seen from the number of complaints made by students in relation to anti-Semitic activity?
Yeah, I can give you the details. The headline, perhaps, that you will find most interesting is that we have received no formal complaints relating to anti-Semitism since the 17th of August. To date. That compares with 12 formal complaints specifically relating to anti-Semitism over the first part of this year.
When was Professor Prauer's office invaded?
9th of October.
So you're saying you haven't had any complaints in relation to that?
No, we haven't. No formal complaints that have been received through our system.
You haven't received any complaints in relation to that, yet you've launched disciplinary action?
We've received no formal complaints through our formal complaints system. We do not rely on...
Doesn't that indicate to you, Professor, that your formal complaint system is largely meaningless if an incident like that isn't picked up?
We worry constantly about a problem that we know that we have with underreporting, with people who, for many possible reasons, do not feel comfortable coming forward with complaints. That is why we don't rely on formal complaints solely. And we've been working very hard over the course of this year to make sure that that's the case. Partly that is about keeping in touch with our Jewish staff and students and really trying to understand what is going on, what they are experiencing, what they are feeling. And that's where most of our information and our insight comes from. We're also aware that people who don't feel comfortable reporting to the university, a situation that we are trying very hard to rectify, we want to build trust in our system, may take their complaints to other bodies. And we're particularly aware of some students in particular who are working with the community security group. And we have initiated a relationship with the CSG so that we can better understand what they are hearing about what's going on in our university, and we can take action. So we don't rely formally on our we don't rely solely on our formal complaint system in order to know what's going on. And we don't rely solely on our formal complaint system in order to initiate disciplinary action.
Would you say that the lack of consequences that have occurred to those who've been engaged in this sort of activity, and we mentioned the 27, we've also, it seems that no one's really had any, meaningful consequence for their actions. Do you think that's eroded the trust in the university's handling of the situation?
Again, I'm afraid I can't accept the characterisation that there have been no meaningful consequences. The consequences that have emerged from the disciplinary action that we've taken has been meaningful and it has been significant.
It hasn't fixed the problem, though, has it?
The trends that we are seeing indicate to us that we are making headway. Have we got more to do? Then yes, of course we do. Now, as I said before, there will be different views. There are some people who think that these consequences were way too severe and that it was a scandal.
I would say that would be very much a minority view. I do not think that would be what the majority of your everyday Australians would be thinking when they hear that today. Well,
at the time that all of this was going on, we were hearing very clearly from very many people who took that view, including people like international human rights organisations who are concerned about a potential violation of the right to peaceful protest. Equally, we heard
Are they concerned about the rights of Jewish students and academics in your university?
Equally, we heard from a lot of people who thought that the consequences that emerged from this were not severe enough. That there is a spectrum of views on this. As I said, I stand by both the integrity of those disciplinary processes and the outcomes that were imposed as being proportionate to the circumstances.
Gillian Siegel said that anti-Semitism is systemic and embedded within our university campuses. Do you think it's systemic and embedded within the University of Melbourne?
I have the greatest respect for the work that the Special Envoy is undertaking, and I respect the view that she has come to. I struggle to accept that characterisation of our university. It's simply not what I see and hear as I move around every day. And in fact, I think you can get a sense of the sentiment around our university from some of the recent events. You may be aware that after the incursion into Stephen Prow's office, the academic board, which is the entire professoriate of the university, spoke unequivocally and emphatically against against the incursion into Stephen Prow's office and against anti-Semitism. As I move around the university, the vast, vast majority of our staff and students share the concern that we have as its leadership about the rise of anti-Semitism.
Yet these events are occurring. It's not every day that you get called before a parliamentary committee and have to, we're not talking about anti-Semitism in the round here. This is an inquiry into anti-Semitism on university campuses. And this has become such a concerning development that you're now here and answering questions. And I feel a bit sorry for you because you've only acting in the VC role and you've had a bit of a tough week, I understand. Do you understand that the gravity of the situation and the understanding that we are concerned that anti-Semitism isn't just something that's externally happening to your university, but is something that potentially is being fostered from within?
Absolutely. There is absolutely no question. Anti-Semitism is a society-wide problem. There is no reason to think that universities uniquely stand apart from it. We have been challenged in the same way that society has. What I would say, though, from a different perspective, is that we accept our responsibility, shared with every other institution in society, but we have a responsibility to be dealing with anti-Semitism. And I would observe as well that I think we have a particular contribution to make to dealing with anti-Semitism from universities, which is why we focused over the course of the year on what we have to do through education and through making sure that we are modelling respectful debate and dialogue and so on at all times to make sure that universities are the places where these sorts of things can be aired, can be debated, but without the kind of activity that we've seen on our campuses over the last year. But we could not be clearer about the gravity of the situation, and we could not be firmer in our resolve in relation to our own responsibility in that situation.
John Monash once held the role that you're acting in now as Vice-Chancellor at the University of Melbourne. 130 years ago, he attended your university as a Jewish student. Mm-hmm. What do you think he would make of the situation at University of Melbourne today, where we've got Jewish students feeling intimidated, where we have academics having their offices invaded? Mm-hmm.
I am in no doubt that all of our Jewish staff and students find the current situation to be of great concern. I know this through speaking with them. I know this through everything that we hear. It is not a situation that any of us at the University of Melbourne, or I think across the sector, would find tolerable, that any Jewish student or staff member would encounter a difficult situation as they go about their study or their work on our campuses. That is not a tolerable situation to us, and we are putting all of our effort into making sure that our campuses are safe and welcoming. Mm.
It seems that we've gone backwards quite a bit over the last 100 years in that regard at the University of Melbourne, unfortunately. But I don't know if we want to throw to some others before we continue.
We'll go Kylie Tink.
Thank you, Chair and Deputy Chair. Actually, my question is to both universities, and I might just start with the University of New South Wales, if I might please, Professor first, to give Professor Phillips a bit of a breather. Can you please, I think one of the things that strikes me consistently in these conversations and the testimony we've heard is the problem with being able to measure what is actually happening on campus. We've just heard the discussion from University of Melbourne about, is it the reports from staff, is it the complaints you get? Can you please help me understand what you're currently doing at the University of New South Wales to gauge how prevalent the issue of anti-Semitism or any form of racism is on your campuses, and whether you have plans for work in that area going forward, how you see that evolving in light of what we've experienced in the last 18 months?
Yes, thank you for that question. And you're right, it's not as simple as just looking at the amount of complaints you get, because for a whole range of reasons. So whilst we do measure incidences through our complaints management and investigation systems, through our conduct and integrity unit, and interestingly at UNSW, We have seen a rise in complaints since October the 7th, quite a significant rise, and so we're obviously concerned about that. But we don't just look at formal complaints reporting mechanisms, because that doesn't really tell the whole story, and we know about how people don't always report what they see for a whole range of reasons. So we also meet with Jewish students and Jewish staff representatives regularly. We work closely with Jewish staff and Jewish students in particular so that we know their lived experiences on the ground. One of the things that I've been most pleased about this year, in a really trying year and a really difficult year for so many of us, is that we've actually met with Jewish students and Arab students to talk about building cultural dialogue at the university. They want to start with students first. They want the university to convene this because they feel it's important for a neutral agent or neutral facilitator to convene this. But the students themselves are wanting to come to the table to talk about how can we develop a safer dialogue across difference, and so that we can actually change the ways that we integrate on this issue, that we interact on this issue. So I think there's been some really interesting progress made in that space. Having said that, in terms of just making sure that our complaint systems are working correctly, since the 7th of October last year, we've increased resourcing across complaints management at UNSW. We've increased personnel in our conduct and integrity team. We've increased security on our campus in order to ensure psychosocial safety, and we've increased resources that are going to our counselling for staff and students. We've also invested heavily in a Speak Up campaign, which is all about building a culture to speak up. And we now have a single portal where all complaints across the university can be lodged, including anonymous complaints. And that's really important too, because then you have to be able to take on board anonymous complaints. And that also enables us to see if there are any areas across the university where specific types of complaints are being reported, even if that's anonymous.
Can I just ask a follow-up on that? Do you publish that data in any way? Do you report back to students and key stakeholders in how that's tracking?
Absolutely. So when a complaint is lodged, particularly a code of conduct complaint, we absolutely would say there's obviously, as Professor Phillips has already outlined, a due process that we must undertake. So we must give the respondent due process, and there must be confidentiality while the complaint is active. But we absolutely communicate directly with the complainant throughout that process. And part of the additional resourcing that's gone into our conduct integrity unit is to ensure that that happens in a timely manner. In relation to public reporting, yes. So we have an annual report through our complaint and integrity unit, where again we don't speak to specifics because that's around confidentiality, but we report the number of complaints, we report the number of actions taken, and that's included also in our gendered violence reporting. And that's been happening for a couple of years now.
Can I just ask?
And do you foresee there being? Oh, sorry. Do you foresee there being any significant changes in that process in the coming 12 months, given what you've seen?
We've responded since October the 7th. We've made significant changes. We've been noticing, as all people have, rising activities of anti-Semitism, but not just anti-Semitism, just more generally racist activity. This is something that's happening globally. It's something that's happening in our society, and universities are but a microcosm of broader social concerns at the moment in terms of social cohesion. So we have noticed that, and because of that, we have proactively addressed the issue through revising our anti-racism policy at the university explicitly to include anti-religious vilification and give that policy more teeth. And we've also explicitly revised our code of conduct to better spell out what sort of behaviour we expect in the context of free speech, and how should free speech actually be exercised at a university, both in terms of academic research and teaching, but it's also in terms of student activity. So we've been having, I suppose, an iterative process in order to respond to what we see as rising incidences of racist and anti-Semitic activity across the culture more broadly.
So I'm just going to jump in there. Thank you so much for that answer, Professor Firth. So on your annual reporting of the complaints process, how long have you been doing that for?
I'll have to take that on notice because, as I said it, I'm new to the university, so I don't know if it preceded me. But we can take that on notice. But it definitely happens because I read the report myself, and it goes up on the website and it's freely and publicly available.
And I mean, why is it important to publicly and transparently outline what the outcomes are of complaint processes are?
Because transparency drives trust. So it's about trust in the complaints process and knowing that your voice is being heard. And it's also an accountability measure. Now, the minute you start to actually run a campaign like our Speak Up campaign, where we're encouraging people to speak up, you know your complaints will go up, right? And in fact, it's a good thing to see your complaints go up, at least in the first instance. Over time, of course, you want complaints to go down. But part of creating that culture of trust, and that culture is the transparency of reporting on complaints and showing that you're not afraid of having complaints go up as long as you're making sure that actions are being taken and that there are consequences to breaches of code of conduct.
And what sort of consequences of the UNSW, what sort of consequences has there been at UNSW?
Again, there is obviously confidentiality arrangements around the actions.
Definitely don't go into people's names or anything like that.
Yeah, in terms of the actions that we take, but dependent on the gravity of the offence, the consequences can be anything from being spoken to, making sure that the person understands the gravity of the situation and understands, and sometimes we do education processes with particularly if they're a student, we actually talk about positive education experiences so that they understand the gravity of what they're doing. We like to feel with our student body that there is a teaching moment.
Yeah.
So where the offences are not, severe, we'll obviously look at that as a teaching moment, but it can be all the way through to suspension and exclusion from the university if that's what the conduct requires.
Has that happened? Has someone been suspended or excluded from the university in these sorts of incidents?
Not to my knowledge in the time that I've been here, but I can take that on notice.
That would be really useful. I'll just go to the Deputy Chair for once on the question.
Thank you, Professor Thurf. Just on your complaints process, how long would you typically anticipate that a process would take to complete? Obviously, it's a bit of a how long's a piece of string, but what is the, how long would a complainant typically have to wait to get a response from the university?
I might get my colleague David Cross to talk to the specifics on that, but as I said, we very deliberately invested in additional resourcing so that it is a reasonable time, because what we know from complaints is that, again, in order to build trust and in order to build confidence in the system, you need to have a tight turnaround for response and as tight a turnaround as you can for action to occur. Of course, that is absolutely how long is a piece of string, because depending on the behaviour of the respondent and what the respondent decides to do, that can also mean that the process is truncated, can take longer. But I'll throw to David Cross for additional specifics.
Yeah, thanks. And Deputy Chair, essentially just echoing what Professor Firth has said, the response is always very rapid in terms of communicating with the complainant, in terms of how long it takes for action. Again, sometimes you're talking a matter of weeks, sometimes you're talking a matter of months. It does largely depend on a whole range of kind of variables, including the actions of the person who is the subject of the complaint in terms of what they take. But we always are very, very careful at UNSW to make sure that response time is extremely fast. The one thing I would say is in the vast majority of complaints, you're seeing a resolution in a reasonably rapid time frame of within a couple of months. But again, there are always outliers to that. So it just depends.
Thank you, Chair.
I think we'll probably go on to the next witnesses after that. But I wanted to thank you both for coming here today and for your evidence and for your action in tackling anti-Semitism on university. The committee requests the questions taken on notice are provided to the committee secretariat by 13 January 2025. We appreciate you coming in today and for making time. If there are any other further questions or if there are further things that the committee wants to raise, then we raised it in the last hearings that we may call universities back, but we'll see how we go in January. And on that note, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.